Welcome to The Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and an administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters, creatives, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. I am joined, as always, by the producer of these live events and our co-administrator, the insouciant Ramesh Santanam.
Hi guys, hi everyone, hi Chris.
How are you doing?
Good. Hanging in there.
It's funny because, I'm like, are we streaming? I sound like I'm at my urologist, I'm just like, how's that stream? Is it a good stream? Is it a strong stream? All right, so how are we doing? We got some people joining us here. Let me go to the chat comments.
Yes, we do. We have someone from Scotland.
Scotland, very nice. I am Scottish.
Oh, really?
Freedom!
I have no Scottish blood in me.
Oh, you don't? Let's see who's here. Just remember, if you want to be identified, you can log into StreamYard. They don't send you anything. You just log in. It's really through Facebook. And then we can see who you are as opposed to just being Facebook user.
Right.
There's Steve Enlow. He's saying ciao. We want to give a shout out to Steve, who of course is the third administrator in our group. And although I want to spend so much time saying hello to everybody, we don't have a whole lot of time today.
No.
So we just got to get right down to business. All right. So you go ahead, Ramesh. You take over, buddy.
Okay, our guests today include, our first guest is John Zauzerny, who runs Bellevue Productions, a leading literary management company with a focus on discovering and breaking new writers and writer-directors in both the feature film and television spaces. John's clients' writing and directing credits include Infinite, Parallel, Eli, Bad Match, Heavy Trip, Office Uprising, Splinter, and Better Watch Out, which is a fantastic Christmas movie. It's on my staple of Christmas movies to watch. I love that film.
I love that movie too.
Amongst others. His clients have written feature scripts that are set up at Warner Brothers, Paramount, 20th Century, Lionsgate, New Line, Sony, Universal, and other studios. His clients also have had 20 scripts on the last 6 blacklists, the annual list of best unproduced feature scripts. His client, Elise Hollander, wrote Blonde Ambition, the #1 script on the 2016 blacklist, and his client, Sophie Dawson, wrote Headhunter, the #1 script on the 2020 blacklist. His clients also have written on TV shows such as FBI International, Shantaram, Secret Invasion, Bosch, Mr. Robot, Training Day, Tiny Pretty Things, Hawaii Five-0, The Man in the High Castle, and Hand of God. He also reps the writer of the Eisner-nominated comic book Little Bird. John has produced feature films Always Watching, Parallel, Eli, and most recently Infinite, directed by Antoine Fuqua and starring Mark Wahlberg and Chiwetel Ejiofor. Raised in Vancouver, Canada, John is a graduate of the Tisch Film and Television program at New York University. I know. Our next guest is Ian Shaw, a prolific creator of all things genre. His specs sales include Warner Brothers' Christo, Fox Capsule, Paramount's Infinite, and Orion's 1031, all of which were featured on the blacklist. Infinite debuted this month on Paramount+. Ian's other produced credits include Magnet Splinter and Sony Crackle's Office Uprising, as well as episodes of Training Day on CBS and Deputy on Fox. He is currently writing Warner Brothers superhero thriller Cloaker and Stampede's Dance Revolution. Ian is a graduate of the USC Film School, and if I may add, Ian is also a genuinely good person. And now here is the trailer for Infinite.
What do I know that you need so bad?
That's why you're here. To find out.
You're not crazy. You never have been. Do you find yourself drawn to places you've never been?
The visions you've had your entire life aren't hallucinations. They're memories.
You're talking about reincarnation.
The legend never die, you get reborn.
We call ourselves the Infinite. We remember skills from all our past lives. It takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. How good would you be after 1,000,000 hours?
Pretty damn good. What do I know that you need so bad?
That's why you're here, to find out.
We have fought one another for centuries. But you can't stop what's coming. The end of all things.
Is he blocked?
Well. We're gonna have to reset your memory.
You gonna drown me? I got a thing about drowning.
Which is,
I don't like it.
you know what, man? I like you this time around.
Shut up and turn it on.
That's perfectly normal.
Kill them all.
There's still time. Time. No more time.
Leap of faith time.
Did you see that? The legend never die, you get reborn.
All right.
All right, yes. Welcome, John and Ian, to the Inside Pitch.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank
Bravo, bravo. Ian, I was watching your face during that trailer. It was lighting up.
One of the happiest days of my life was the first time I got to see that trailer, just because I've been writing big crazy action sequences since the day I wrote my first script, but none of them have ever gotten made until now. So actually getting to see all this wild shit that was happening in my imagination actually exist on the screen was just delightful.
Now you've had other films produced, so is that sort of the factor that makes this different, that it is such a big movie and it is such a big action movie?
Yeah. I've never had a studio movie made. Everything that I've had made has been either in television or done independently. And I think the most expensive thing I ever had made was probably my episode of Training Day, which cost a couple million, and everything else that I had made was under that. Having all these daydreams about big crazy action set pieces living in my head for 14 years, there's a really special feeling that goes along with actually seeing that manifested on a screen.
I'll bet. Just for our viewers' sake, we interviewed Ian previously, and you can see that interview on our YouTube channel where we corral these various videos. And that's just all of Ian's origin story, and of course his take on the craft, which I think is really great. And after watching this trailer, it's safe to say that Ian knows what he's doing. So you should definitely check that video out, because today we're going to talk more about the writer-manager relationship and sort of how that works for them, along with, I guess, a lot of the other stuff. And but John, we have never met before, so this is a great pleasure. Thank you for being here. What's it like for you to see that?
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, my always go back to, this is something that Ian and I worked on for a lot of years. Weirdly, it actually came together once we sold it. We sold it in 2017. All of the deals and all the stuff took really till 2018 to get worked out. And then Ian came in and started working on the script for Paramount, and Antoine came on pretty quickly. I think Antoine came on before you even did your first rewrite, right, Ian? I think
the first rewrite was for Antoine.
Yeah, so that was really fast. Obviously Lorenzo Bonaventura, we brought it, I did a whole thread on this on Twitter, which you can kind of see for more details, but we brought it to Mark Verratti and Lorenzo's company, They sold it to Paramount. So Mark and Lorenzo came on that way. And Lorenzo and Antoine had a deep relationship from Lorenzo greenlighting Training Day, and I think The Replacement Killers when he was at Warner Brothers.
Oh, wow. They also did Shooter.
Yeah, I was going to get to, but they same back then, and then they did Shooter together. So they did Shoot together, and that was with Mark, and he had a deep relationship with Mark. So Antoine came on pretty fast. And then we had Chris Evans actually on board for a long time. And then he departed and Mark came on. But my point being, like, so sold 2017, deals finally got completely done, and Ian came on to rewrite for Antoine in 2018. And went into production in mid-2019 or late 2019. We were wrapped in December 2019, right before the pandemic, luckily. And so, all things considered, the process of Ian and I working on it took a while, but it went into production really fast. And I really just think a lot about, Ian and I working on it in, my office at the time, which was, not tiny, but like it was not a huge space, and just really breaking a lot of the really cool ideas together. And the first time we thought about, and Ian would bring up certain sequences and seeing them now in the trailer, whether it, like the phrase, which I think was a little expository for Ian's taste at first, but I was like, this is the trailer. We always knew this was a trailer for us. We had to stick it. Was those aren't dreams. Those are
hallucinations of their memories. Yeah.
Memories. That's the trailer, or like the sequence where the first trailer has a lot of the interrogation sequence, which Ian worked really hard on, and then that turns into like this wild chase through a police station. I remember talking to Ian about, was it more interesting if Sophie Cookson's character is interviewing him and then the bad guys burst in? But that felt reminiscent of Terminator. Obviously, I'll Be Back, that whole sequence. And so Ian flipped it and got this great sequence that's kind of a highlight of the trailer, of both trailers actually. And so it's just really cool to see something that you worked on. And so often these movies, and Ian and I have sold a lot of them over the years together, actually get made, and you're like, wow, this thing went from an idea Ian was talking to me about, and we were kind of working on in an office, to being, I think for me the coolest thing was going to set and seeing all these trailers and offices with like infinite production, and you're like, wow, that wasn't just a title that Ian thought up. It was like, now it's a movie. These people are employed because Ian and myself worked on something in a room for a long time. So that for me is what I really think about when I see that trailer is wow, this thing went from an idea to concrete, and that's always a little disorienting sometimes.
So this brings up, I think, a great talking point, which is that what is it that a manager does? Because I think a controversial, if I can use that word, element of management, at least for some management, is that they not only rep writers, but some also produce.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to talk about. I think that is a more controversial aspect. Primarily the biggest difference between agents and managers, and why you see a lot of agents leave and start things like Range Media, where they really are very clear about, we want to produce our clients' work, and that will be a revenue generator for us. Look, I'll kind of answer the first question, which is, what does a manager do? And so, there's a lot. It's kind of like that Dostoevsky line, I think, about families or whatever. It's like, all happy families are the same. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. It's like everyone manages in their own particular way. I actually never worked in representation before I became a manager. In fact, the person who spurred me to become a manager is this guy, Ian, because he was literally like, you should be a manager. You should be my manager. And people kind of brought it up. But when Ian said it, he is and was my closest collaborator, who I'm not married to. So I really took it really seriously. And really, he is the reason I'm a manager, is because he believed in me to be one. But so I took a lot of what I'd learned from working in development, wanting to be a writer for a lot of years, working on a TV show as a writer's assistant, and being an independent producer, and kind of put it into who I am as a manager. And that is really someone who finds clients most of the time who've never had a manager before, or who've like never really broken out before, you know, haven't sold a movie before in a big way. We tend to find, my company tends to find people and break them. Not always, but often. And, you know, help kind of guide them on where they want to go to and how they want to do that. And we're very hands-on. There are some agents who become managers and operate still a lot of times like agents. That's not what we do. We're very hands-on. We're very detail-oriented. We're very development-oriented, which we can speak about in more detail, kind of the process that basically the process that Ian and I developed together when I was working as a producer, working with Ian, has become kind of the standardized process that I work on with my clients and the rest of my managers work on to some degree with their clients. So we can kind of talk about that. But to shift a little bit into your question about producing, which is a controversial aspect of being a manager, you know, the way that I've operated is very simple, which is if it's my original idea, so something like Eli came from an original idea, although that predates even me being a manager. But if it's my original idea, or it's an IP that I bring to a client, so in this case, I optioned the Reincarnationist papers and brought it to Ian, then, you know, or there's another thing that we sold called 1031, I optioned a screenplay and brought it to Ian. You know, there's some, you know, then in that case, I'm producing it, you know. That to me is a very clear distinction where it's either my original idea or it is something that I located and brought to the client. So that's how I've done it in my producing. I haven't had a lack of producing things, but I would say my easy catchphrase is there's two kinds of managers. There are producers who occasionally manage, and there are managers who occasionally produce. And I would say I'm a manager who occasionally produces. I prefer managing and finding clients and building them up to, you know, I don't love being on set. I don't love all that nitty gritty. So, you know, there have been times where I've stepped off at being a producer, even though it was my idea that I originated or something I brought to a client, because it was a hindrance to the project. Because I'd rather my client's career be pushed forward than my producing. But, you know, different managers have different priorities. And that is a smart thing for writers to talk about when they are signing with managers, because there have been situations where managers take advantage of that.
Knowing what the talent agencies of which I am employed by one just went through with the WGA, do you predict that the WGA will next come after managers?
I don't know that it'll be the next thing. I think the next thing that they will do will be, and should be, the it was 2019 or 2020 when the last agreement was. So that means 2023 would 2024 will be when it would really go down. I think the next focus will be on the deal with the what's the organization of studios called? I'm blanking on it, but it'll be that deal with the studios, because residuals for streaming are abysmal compared to theatrical. And so I think that will be the focus and has been the focus. And I think if the pandemic had not happened, there's a very high likelihood of a strike would have happened last year. Personally, that's my thing. Do I think that the WGA will address the manager thing? I do think that will be. And to be honest with you, if someone puts a piece of paper in front of me and says, hey, you know, you need to get the sign off from your clients for them to, you know, you can only produce if your clients sign off on it, then that's fine with me. If someone says you can never produce your client's work, I think that's going to be a lot harder, because, you know, most of my clients, especially the ones I produce for, I think can speak to how I brought them things and you know, found ideas for them and very much developed it. So hopefully there'll be some kind of, you know, compromise that we can arrive at, rather than just this never happens, because right. I don't think that's quite fair. And I also think managers have a lot more, there's historically been an antipathy between agents and writers. Goes back to Sunset Boulevard, and every movie that ever was about a writer, the agent didn't come off particularly well. Mm-hmm. But managers, I mean, there are some managers who you know, are more controversial, but in general, I think managers are looked on a lot more fondly. And in fact, when the WGA ATA thing went down, they asked managers to step in and act as agents, you know. So I don't think it'll be quite
which didn't go over that well with the managers, from what I remember.
No, because there's the whole thing. But yeah, but to answer your question, I think the next big battle will be with streamers over residuals, and I don't think anything will happen before then. But I wouldn't be surprised in the next 10 years if it turns to that.
So then let me ask this question. Were you disappointed that the movie was pulled from theatrical to premiere on a streamer?
I mean, personally, and I want to, Ian can speak to it, but I think this probably speaks for both of us, which is it was disappointing because we would have loved to have seen a movie like this in the theater. But at the same end, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's a very crazy time. And the worst thing that happens to us professionally is that our movie ends up in streaming, as opposed to, it's hard to feel too bad for ourselves about that. But is it what is it the way we dreamed it? No, not necessarily, but it does relieve the box office pressure, which, we're seeing even with movies like In the Heights. It's been tricky, because people are still, I haven't gone and seen a movie in the cinema yet, since the pandemic started, and I work in this business,
Me too. Yeah.
So, that's, I think, speaks to still some reluctance on the part of people, to do that. And so, it relieves us of that pressure, which was nice. Yeah, I mean, and it's also just the new reality. If you look at Paramount, Coming to America went to Amazon. Tomorrow War went to Amazon. A lot of their movies have been doing that.
Without Remorse. Yeah.
Was that, sorry?
Without Remorse went to Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, a lot of these movies have been going to streamers because I think for those companies, they see. We also had a regime change at Paramount, right? The people who greenlight our movie are no longer in charge of Paramount, So, anyways, but the answer is we're disappointed, or I'm disappointed, but I also understand the factors. So, Ian, I'll give you the answer.
Just to piggyback on that, like the dream was to see this on the biggest screen possible. Like I was going to go see this thing in fucking IMAX when, back when it was going to come out in theaters. But I'm realizing in retrospect, the worst case scenario for this movie for me as a writer would be, we come out, on thousands of screens around the world. Something goes wrong where the movie doesn't do well. It hurts my career. Maybe it hurts John's career. But on a macro level, it could be a bomb that size could be used as a weapon against future creativity. Like if hey, look what happened when Paramount took a swing on original IP with Infinite. This is why we're only going to do like super established brands. Like, I don't want to, something that I write to be the reason why studios in the future say no to other people making original content.
Right.
With something going straight to streaming, there's less of a chance of that happening just because streaming is lower profile.
But there's no more stigma on streaming. 15 years ago, if your movie went to Netflix, if it was that long, let's say 12 years ago, it was the kiss of death. Now filmmakers clamoring to get their films onto Netflix. I have A-list clients that are involved with Netflix movies.
My parents still can't figure out how to stream Paramount Plus, though. So I don't know if your parents figured it out either. My parents have not. Yeah. They have an old Apple TV, and the Apple TV doesn't let you add new apps. So they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, you could get a new Apple TV. They're like, yeah, I like my Apple TV.
So that is frustrating. And also, Paramount Plus is probably the newest streamer, yes?
Yeah.
Which would mean, I'm assuming, that their viewership, that their, whatever the word is, isn't as high, obviously.
But that's why we were used. We were used to draw eyeballs to Paramount Plus.
Absolutely.
Particularly on that day was the day that they had added like 1,000 movies to the service. Right. So that was our goal. Our job was to be to draw people in.
Right. Well, we had a Denzel film that was supposed to go theatrical, and then HBO Max used that as their first. That was the first film. And not a lot of happy campers at my camp as a result of that. But yeah, this is the new normal. So So welcome to it, I guess. And really right now, I mean, anybody that can get a film made, it's a miracle, let alone a film of this size and scope. And then
we've got a $150 million movie made. So
yeah, I mean, come on.
That's a pretty, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be involved in a $150 million movie again. You know, I have some movies, you know, we're working on where the budget's gonna be like 60 million or 30 or 40, which is still like a lot of money.
Sure.
But like 150, it's rare the time when you get a studio to spring that kind of coin.
So I love this backstory because Ian did not reveal this to us the last time, that he created you. Basically, so you are his Frankenstein in regards to being a manager. I mean, folks, like if you're like what an amazing story. You're looking for representation. So what do? You create.
Wow.
Ian,
did you tell the whole story of how we started working together?
I have not told the story.
Tell the whole story.
So let's hear it.
All right, so I met John back in 2008, I believe, when he was still an independent producer. He was just
right before the writer's strike.
Yeah.
So I was working as a writer's assistant on Castle. I had this Nathan Fillion show that my boss at the time, Andrew Marlowe, created, and I had started working with a buddy of mine called Bobby Sablehouse, and we had started a production company, and we were working to work with writers on ideas that we would bring to them. As producers, and we read Ian's work at the time, and it was amazing. And so we set a meeting with him.
So yeah, so I go in there, I meet John and Bobby, and I just immediately like these guys. I immediately think that John is a really smart, creative guy, and at the time they had this sort of American gangster style version of the Count of Monte Cristo that they were looking for writers to pitch on. So I bring in a pitch on this, and they don't go for it. They shoot it down.
It was like it was between you and someone else.
Yeah, so they
a good career, not as good as yours, but a good career.
So they gave it to the other guy, and I was so pissed off about it that my reaction was, well, fuck this guy. I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to bring him my next project and show him that I'm the person he should be working with. So I brought him my next spec idea, and he developed it into something that was more sellable.
He came in, he said it's set in the future in a post-apocalyptic New York. And I was like,
yeah.
And I was like, what if we got rid of the future? We got rid of New York, because like otherwise it seems like Escape from New York or a million other movies. And he was like, and I'm like, we just moved to San Francisco, and then we did. And he was like, well, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, so the first thing he does is reject me. The second thing he does is change everything about my movie, and yet somehow this still turned into a partnership. So
because that to me is always the trick of being a great producer or a great development person, is to do it in a way that the writer loves you every step of the way, and that takes skill.
I don't know if Ian loved me, but he couldn't deny it was better.
I think he loves you.
Well, he loves me now. He literally was the guy who, when I got married to my wife, he was our officiant. He's the guy who married us.
Really?
So
wow.
The relationship is very deep.
Wow.
Yeah, it was that was a beautiful day. That was me as the officiant, and John's other old writer buddy, Will Bell, who wrote Gangster Squad and Aquaman, as his best man. And I hate to say this, but Will's speech just blew mine out of the water. Like I was like, this is bullshit. This is why he gets paid more than me.
But things are changing. Things are changing.
So anyway, we write that first one together. It's a massively expensive action movie that we don't sell. We get pretty close to a few different places. We had F. Gary Gray on it for a while, but never got it off the ground. But the experience was so good, like just the collaboration was so good, that I wanted to do another one. So John comes back to me. He's like, hey, well, you
remember the Count of Monte Cristo?
Yeah. You wanted to do Count of Monte Cristo. So, what if instead of doing like the American Gangster version, what if you get to do your future movie now? Let's do a sci-fi Count of Monte Cristo. So we developed that one together. It took forever because, that was us figuring out our process where, I discovered that the only thing that kept me from getting lost in the woods was to meet.
Oh,
meet with him like once a week and turn in pages and get notes. Sorry, my froze. I discovered that the only way our process worked was to meet once a week and do notes. So with that one, we finally finished it. We sold it to Warner Brothers. It got us on the blacklist. It was my first time getting on there, and after that, things started turning better for my career. And
at that point, your representation at the time was like, I guess it's okay you work with Zal Zerny. I still don't get it. Still don't quite understand why you're working with these Bobby, I work with John in particular.
These baby producers.
There's other people you could be working with, but I guess.
Right. I was aware of that, but fuck them. I liked working with who I like working with. So, every project that I write after that, where I'm developing it with Zal, the end result is we usually sell it, and 3 more times after that we got on the blacklist, and some of these things started to get made. So eventually I was realizing, like, the person that I want managing my career isn't my manager, he's my producer. So I said, like, if you start your own shingle, I will be your first client.
Yeah, and that was really how Bellevue came together, was Ian really believing in that. And and so I shifted into management in 2015, only 6 years ago, and brought along a colleague of now a colleague of mine, Jeff Portnoy, and then we had a bunch of scripts in the blacklist that year. The next year we had Blonde Ambition by Elise Hollander, who's also my wife, who was, by the way, was my girlfriend before she was a client. And yeah, that was kind of us off to the races, and then we've had a fair amount of success as a company. Ian obviously got Infinite made, has gotten staffed on a bunch of stuff. We sold a movie that he co-wrote called 1031. A lot of assignment work for Ian. We have a new spec right now that we are partnering with producers on, and we're already talking about the next one after that. So it's in between all the assignment work and stuff like that. So yeah.
So John, you said that you really like to work with new writers, to discover writers. So how do you discover them? Where do you find new writers?
Yeah, I find them a few different ways. The first way, and kind of the most classic way, which is the way that people don't really do as much anymore, is through query emails. And I actually do read all the query emails I get sent in. And that's how I found Sophie Dawson, who was #1 on the blacklist last year. She sent me a query email in August. I loved it. Read her script, met with her, was like, let's work together, and we signed her in like August, and 4 months later she was #1 on the blacklist. Crazy.
What makes for a good query, if I may interrupt?
Yeah, like I have a kind of so I'm pretty active on Twitter, just FYI. My which you should get on there, Chris. I have a pinned tweet which has this compilation of all these threads I've written, these various kind of tweet threads on different things. So I have a whole thing about what a query, how a query letter is, signing a headhunter writer, all this kind of stuff, how we sold Infinite, blah blah blah. But the short version is, #1, no attachments. Don't attach a file. You wouldn't accept a file that was sent over. So don't send your screenplay or outline or law or anything. Just say, subject line that relates to the thing. Dear John, and then the, blah, blah, blah. I am this, I am that. Log line, which is the most important thing. And then thank you, please let me know if you'd like to read it at the end, that's it. The log line is the most important thing to get there. And Sophie's was something like, I can't remember exactly, but I put it up on Twitter, which is basically like, a cannibal, loves to eat people, but he'll only eat people who have 250,000 more followers on social media, because famous people taste better. And I was like, well, that's fucking weird. And it could have been a terrible script, like you get these great concepts, and sometimes or weird concepts, and sometimes they're just like, they don't live up to the logline, but this one really did. But yeah, I find people through query emails. I find people through a lot. I would say the other biggest one is the Blacklist website. I found a lot of people through the Blacklist, and again, there's the annual list, which is the best scripts of the year, and then there is the website where you upload a script, you pay a fee for a reader or whatever, and I get an email every week of the scripts that I think score either a 7 or an 8 from the readers, and so I look through that email. I click on the log lines that are interesting to me, and then I can read a few pages of the script, and if I like those first few pages, then I download it to read the rest of the script later that week. So the Blacklist website, Coverfly, Script Pipeline, those are kind of the services that I use the most. And then, sometimes Ian will hey, a buddy of mine or my clients will recommend people, sometimes through agents, but not that often. Those are usually bake-offs where like it's me and like 4 other managers meeting the person, through lawyers. Yeah, those are kind of the, sometimes I like hear about something. I'm like, I think someone's funny on Twitter, or like someone like this comic book sounds cool or whatever, But I would say the number one places would be through query emails and through the Blacklist website and places like Coverfly and Script Pipeline.
There are always a lot of
sorry, and competitions. All right, I didn't even mention that.
Not all competitions, right? Not all.
I would say the Austin Film Fest, the Nichols, Final Draft, Big Break, Script Pipeline. Those are the ones that come to. There's a couple other that I also do. Oh, and then also through film schools, UCLA, USC, NYU.
So it's interesting that you are open to this and open to queries, because I do see a lot of feedback from our group members. They're often like, "Oh, nobody reads query letters anymore," and I read them. I may not respond to them, but I read them, and clearly you do also.
I think most people don't. To be fair, most people don't. I am the exception. But again, like my situation is very unique, okay? Because like I run my own company, right? It's my company, I have other people who work with me, and but like most people work for a larger company, like an Anonymous or a 3 Arts or whatever, and there may be some blanket thing like we don't do queries, some kind of legal thing or whatever, So I think your queries for managers are going to be more successful with the people who are a bit more independent oriented, run their own shops or smaller shops. That would be my suggestion. Would not be, and don't even bother with agencies. That almost never works.
So do your research, people. Do your research on who you're querying, and know if they're a person that might be receptive to it. And follow John on Twitter, obviously.
John,
Ian, are you on Twitter?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so you should follow me on Twitter.
I'm not as active as John, but I'm on there, and occasionally, I like to talk shop with writers. It's I don't have a tremendous following, but I like talking with other creative people on there.
Ian's also on Reddit screenwriting, so go figure.
Oh God!
Follow Ian.
You must never go there, Simba.
No.
I just, for whatever reason, I just avoid all of those landscapes. It's too much. It's just too much overkill. I got enough with this group, and that's it. And I'm all done with it. If
you have your own group and you're very involved.
If anybody really gives a fuck about what it is that I have to say, they can come here. And otherwise, oh well. Okay, Ramesh, I think you have some questions.
Yeah, John, how often do you ask for a script off a query? And also, when you do ask for a script from a query, do you read the whole thing, or is there like a limit to your page limit? Like, I'll get to 10 pages. If it hasn't moved me, I'm out of it.
I mean, look, people ask me all the time, like, what's your rate? But it's kind of like when you're online dating, how many times people respond to your messages? They respond when they're interested, So I don't know if I had to like really pull a number out of a hat. I get like 50 queries a day. Really, I do. And I probably request 2 to 3 scripts a week, maybe. So that should give you an idea. And I read until I don't feel like reading anymore. So that's the answer. I would say I definitely read at least 15 to 20 pages. And then I put it down if I'm not interested in it, and like dialogue's really the thing I look for the most. I mean, like Ian is a great writer of many, many things, action set pieces, plotting. He's incredibly good at plotting and concept and pacing. and also just making a very readable script. I learned a lot from working with him in terms of how to like make a script just be like you're reading it and you're just moving. You're moving. His transitions are impeccable.
Oh, yeah.
But
I think explosions on every page.
Yeah, the thing that is, the thing that I think really broke through initially was phenomenal dialogue, and his dialogue feels like a movie. I mean, I know he really models, well, not models himself, but it was inspired by people like Shane Black, and so I'm not saying everyone has to write like Ian or Shane Black, but I would say that if your dialogue is boring, that is a big problem. For me, the dialogue has to feel interesting. When we think of the great writers, when people are like, oh man, who are like the big famous writers, like usually Aaron Sorkin, right? That's the number one come. Aaron Sorkin is are his plots crackerjack? Not really, What he is a great writer of dialogue and character. And that is the thing. So because that's inevitably the next question is like, what do you look for? And I would say the first thing is like the dialogue is dull. If it's kind of what I like to call open the door, close the door dialogue, which is, hi, how's it going? Pretty good. How are you doing? I'm pretty good. How's your day going? Well, good. It's like, get to it, and so that would be the thing that I look for is like, is the dialogue drawing me in? Is it feeling interesting? This is because the reason most movies get made is because actors want to play their role. And the reason they want to play their role is they want to say cool shit. And so if you write cool shit for actors to say, you have a good chance of getting paid to be a screenwriter.
By the way, Ian, I believe when we interviewed Shane Black, he gave you a shout out.
Yeah, that
he was all excited with that.
I sent Zal the YouTube link once you guys put that up. It was like, dude, look at this, he's talking about our movie, holy shit. Like, for me that was like being in a Jersey bar band and getting like a nod from Springsteen. Like that made me super happy. So guys, thank you.
Well, we were more than happy to pay you back for your time here. Okay, Ramesh, go ahead, because I know that I can see that the questions are piling up.
Ian, with your relationship with John, how long do you work on a script, and when do you bring it to John?
I don't start a script without John. Basically, our process is either I come up with an idea or he comes up with an idea that he brings to me, and it's usually just a log line. It's just a sentence. It's because we can tell whether or not a movie is worth writing and worth putting the energy into just based on concept alone. Like we just vet the shit out of our concepts. So we start with one sentence and we say like can I see the trailer for that movie? Can I see the poster for that? Can I imagine a movie star in that? Can I imagine a director getting excited? Does it feel like a movie? And then I'll take that sentence and I'll expand it into a page or maybe a 5-page mini outline that I turn into Zal, get his notes. We expand it to 10 pages, get notes, expand it to 15, sometimes 20, do a final round of notes. And by that time, a couple months have gone by and we now have a really solid outline. At that point, I go to script and I write, instead of, sitting down and writing the whole thing, I write the first act, turn it in, workshop it, get notes, then write the next 30, repeat that process. And by the time we're done with it, our first draft is kind of like having a fourth draft. Yeah. I get lost in the woods easily when I'm writing solo.
When Ian was first working on Christo, was it Christo?
Yeah, it was Christo. Yeah.
We learned our lesson on Christo. Tell the Christo story.
Okay, so on Christo, I try to go.
We're like, all right, man, go write the script. We'll see you later. We'll see you on the other side.
Yeah, so I go home. I start writing this thing. A year goes by. I've written a 180-page first draft that's still not done. And there's, I at this point, I can't tell up from down. So I called John just in a, just a state of utter defeat. Like, dude, I'm up shit creek, man. I don't know what to do with this movie. Like, we're not even into the third act yet, and it's already 3 hours long. What do I do? So we sat down, we threw out 160 of the 180 pages. We kept the first 20 and then rebuilt the movie from there.
How did you do that? I don't think I ever saw the 180-page draft.
I don't think you. I'm hoping to God you didn't because it was dog shit. But I
I would just hear that. I would hear 180. I'd be like, not interested. Sorry. Start again.
Yeah. So, I mean, even Sorkin's draft of Steve Jobs was only 170.
I mean, like Schindler's List was, it's like 135 pages.
I mean,
it's like,
as a rep, like when I hear high page counts, that's fine. I mean, like I've worked on scripts with friends and clients. They've been 180, and you find a way to get them down. I mean, look, it doesn't go all the way down to 120, but you can get it down to like 135 because you're like, you don't need this. This is here, So I'm like, oh my God, like that's the job, right? Which doesn't mean I love doing it, but yeah. In the case of Christo, we went back to that's what we literally the process Ian has described, and there's a little more to it. After where we got, which we'll just say in a second, but like it's crazy hearing Ian say it because usually it's me telling other people it because it literally comes from working with Ian. This 30 pages at a time, break an outline, whole entire outline, then 30 pages at a time method came from working with Ian, and it has changed my entire. It's the reason I think even though Bellevue's only been around for like 6 years, in those first 5 years we had 2 of the #1 scripts on the blacklist and have such a high ratio of scripts on the blacklist and high ratio of things that sell and launch people is because it's quality, and that quality comes from grinding it out like 30 pages at a time, or
provided that the person the writer is working with has a strong vision, because there are a lot of those kinds of processes that can go adrift easily when they're not in the hands of somebody who understands how to develop, how to help a writer through that process.
College, right? Like I'm not going to have someone in my company who can't do that. So yeah, but there's a little bit more to it. You want to walk through after you've got the first draft done, what we do.
So once we've got that first draft, we do what's called the circle of trust.
Well, usually we do one more draft. Usually we do one more full draft at least. We're like,
right.
Okay.
So like we see how the those like 100 to 120 pages all hang together after those first rounds of notes. Do another pass on that. When we're happy with that, then we send it out to what's called the circle of trust, where we have, I guess 5 to 10 other writers in the Bellevue stable read the scripts, give their thoughts on it. We compile those notes into one giant like mega document, and then we go through and look for patterns. We say like, okay, what are
usually the compilation has the patterns in it? Yeah. So it's like exactly. 4 people said the first act was confusing. 5 people said the third act was unsatisfying. If one person says one thing, we don't agree with it, and nobody else said it, then it's fine. It's like a test screening, but for your script, And plus, because I know my clients, I know the people we're working with, I know that this person doesn't like sci-fi movies, and this person doesn't like music movies, so I can tailor the reads to that idea, But we really do a test screening for the script and see how it, because like when you take a script out, you don't get to like, oh, we got a bad reaction, okay, well, let's go back and rewrite and we'll send it out again. Once it's out, it's out. That's it. People are not reading it a second time normally. So we make sure before the script goes out, and especially with things like sci-fi movies, horror movies, anything like that has like kind of a weird mythology to it, we want to make sure that it hangs together. Something like Infinite, Ian and I have been working on that for years, and we were like, are people going to understand the idea of the dethroner gun? Are they going to understand like how do you understand what reincarnation, how it works in this movie? We're actually pretty surprised with that draft that we took out that we didn't have a lot of problems with logic that we were worried that we might necessarily. But yeah, we always do the kind of, we always call it the circle of trust thing, which is more often that really does help kind of separate, I think, Bellevue scripts, is because, the problems that you might face from an executive, we at least get to like run them through the clients. And not only is it great to get notes, but because the clients are writers, and like Ian does notes on all the circle of trust scripts, Ian will often pitch a solution. Hey, what about this? And that doesn't mean that's the only solution, but that solution either might work or it might inspire us, me and the writer, to figure out a different solution. Right. That's not the right thing, but what about this? And so it's great because you're getting notes, and often when you do audience test screenings, they're just like, make it shorter, make it funnier, make it better, But writers tend to have actual solutions that you can work on. So that's been really, and I've been really lucky to have Ian give notes on almost every single script I've ever taken out that went through the circle of trust. So having a top tier writer give notes on scripts, that's something. That's also, I think, because I didn't come from representation. I don't think any other company is going to do that. They're not going to ask their clients to read other clients' work. Can you imagine CAA or WME doing that? Hey, will you read this other writer's script and give notes on it just as like a favor and like on a regular basis? But because Bellevue is a small company, because people come up, but I think also because, you know, people like Ian or Chris Devlin or Elise, because some of the more higher profile writers who've been really high on the blacklist or sold or had big studio movies get made, because they're giving notes, there's a feeling like, oh, that's what you do. And not all my clients give notes. Some people don't have the time. Some people ain't great at giving notes. But the people who do are very, very good at it. But again, that's things comes from not being in representation. That was something I first did as a producer, because it was, you know what it was? It was like, I had this other script. Hey, Ian, you're my buddy, but I also work with you. As a producer, can you give me some notes on this other script? You know, because he was my friend. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really useful. We should do this more regularly. And so again, it comes back to something that Ian and I developed together, you know, or I would give Ian notes on like stuff he was working on, like assignment stuff, just when I was a producer, just as his friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's all about creating multiple layers of quality control. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say that from my limited knowledge as to how managers work, this is probably unique. And I think a lot of it is because John's background is development, producing, and writing. Right. Where a lot of managers might have come from, as you said earlier, the agency world, which means that they might have a law degree, you know, or like an MBA.
They're more focused on sales.
It's much more business oriented, and so but still, I think that because I'm so story centric in what it is that I do, well, like I love this approach.
They have people like you, so they aren't used to like necessarily giving notes or giving thought process or thinking through the process. And that when they're now a manager and they don't have Chris, they're like, oh shit, well, you know. Yeah,
or you know what they do? They still reach out to me. I'm like, hey man, you're not a coworker anymore. You know, you better be cutting me a check. But right. But yeah, so like to me, I think this is like if I were going to have a management company, this is exactly the way that I would want to do it. But
I've heard people come to me sometimes, producers, and they're like, well, if your clients have great ideas, we would develop them with them. I'm like, yeah, but that's what I'm for.
Right.
I don't need you for that.
That's right. Yeah.
And again, if it's not my idea, I'm not. So like my client, Chris Thomas Devlin, who wrote Cobweb, which we sold to Lionsgate, and some other great scripts, or Video Nasty, which we also sold to Lionsgate. I helped develop those from scratch, from just an idea, but I'm not producing them because they weren't my ideas. Chris is writing something right now that I am producing, but that's because it was an idea that I brought to him and said, hey, I think we should do a movie about this public domain IP, and here's the spin I think we could do on it. That's the first time I've ever produced one of Chris's scripts, because it's the first time that was my idea. Cobweb and Video Nasty, those were his pretty far well-developed ideas, you know? And I remember people asking me, Ian, you know who, asked me when we sold Video Nasty and Cobweb, they're like, oh, you should just come on as an EP. And I was like, that's not what I do. They're like, really? That's so weird. Why would you want to just come on to produce it? I'm like, well, because I don't do that. They're like, oh, okay, well, all right.
This is because you're Canadian. That's why.
You know what? It's because every fucking time I get asked, like, well, why do you produce? What are your standards for producing? And like, by the way, like I remember being on a panel early in my career, and it was me and like guys from 3 other companies, and all those guys were employees. They weren't like the people who run the company. And I gave my answer, which was very clean cut, and the other guys were like, well, it depends on what the, you know, they kind of like wiggled around, because I have a really clean cut process, and other management companies don't, because they want to reserve the right to produce. You know, I mean, early on, Ian, we were working together. I think you remember that, you know, Benders Pink reserved the right to produce if they so desired to drop in at any point. They didn't end up doing that, but they reserved the right to produce if they wanted, you know?
Yeah, I remember that.
Ian, someone asks here, has writing such a big budget film opened more doors for you? And does it put more pressure on you now that you've written this big budget?
Well, the fact that it went straight to streaming definitely takes some of the pressure off. So that's a plus. in terms of doors that it's opened, I would say that yeah, I like the types of assignments that I get offered now often play in that bigger space now. Like you know, in the years since selling Infinite, like I've been brought in to work on higher profile projects, on bigger budget stuff. What it really did though was really help establish a brand for me in terms of what I'm good at, and in terms of what you can expect if you hire me. Like, you know, it wasn't that I, you know, immediately started getting offered, you know, wall-to-wall giant action movies. It was more like I was getting offered, you know, things across the budget range and across the genre range, but the one thread that they all had in common was that everyone was looking for me to do tonally what I did with Infinite, which is make something that is big and noisy and fun. It doesn't, you know, it could be a $10 million movie, it could be a $100 million movie, but if you had a script that felt kind of stagnant or stale, or feeling like it needed some jolt of life put into it, you know, you could call me and I would be the guy who comes in and makes it fun.
I think the thing that's interesting, I had a friend who's a TV writer. He's like, oh, is Ian's career going to change now that Infinite's come out? And I mean, look, if Infinite come out theatrically and made $1 billion, yeah. But the reality is, once we sold Infinite and you know, it got around town, the moment you sell a script for like a lot of money, which we did sell Infinite for a lot of money, everyone in town reads it because they want to see what they missed out on. And so the effect of Infinite, I mean, look, Antoine coming on, the movie getting made, definitely were helpful in terms of buffing up Ian. But the moment we sold Infinite, that script got out into the world, and so people were aware of Ian's skill set. And you know, the success that it had in terms of being a huge director and getting made with a huge actor, that definitely kind of enhanced things. But really, Infinite, the moment we sold it, really put to the town, Ian Shore can write these kind of things. And so it's been a cumulative thing, as opposed to like right now, suddenly they see him in a certain way. And the funny thing is, the thing Ian had sold like the next year, the next thing we sold after Infinite was a sub like $10 million horror movie that Ian co-wrote. So like, you know, between, you know, $150 million and a sub 10 million, Ian has a wide range. And so that was kind of the funny thing, is that, you know, Ian gets brought on like small horror movies as well, because he's written and sold those as well, and gotten those made prior to Infinite also.
So Ian doesn't have a lot more time with us. And so I just want to throw one last question out at him, because he does have a baby. Ian, how should writers manage their manager?
Oh, well, that's a fantastic question. I think that depending on where you are in your career, if you are first starting out and you are struggling to break in and get your material out to the town, if you're just starting to push the boulder up the hill, having any rep is better than having no rep. But once you get to the place in your career where you can be choosy about who you work with, the best thing that you can do is find your own John Zazzirni. Like it's to find someone who really gets what you do, whose tastes really align with yours, whose work ethic is reflective of yours, and who has a personal investment in seeing you succeed in the long term. You know, it's like half the battle will be picking the right person in the first place. And, you know, bear in mind, if you sign with somebody in the beginning of your career, that doesn't make you beholden to them forever. If you get to a certain place where you can trade up, then that's a good option.
Unless you sign with me, then you don't ever trade up. It's just
then it. So like I guess the other big lesson that I've learned from having Zhao as my manager, or having managers since the beginning of my career, is that while they can be incredibly useful for development and for guiding your career, the real engine for it still has to be you. There's this fantasy out there that you can sign with somebody and then jobs are going to fall into your lap, and you can stop hustling. Whereas the truth is, the hustle never fucking stops. It's you just got somebody hopefully talented and passionate hustling alongside you.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that is the key. So many people complain about their reps, like, oh, they don't do anything for me. I'm like, well, what are you doing? Well, I don't have to do anything. I have a rep.
Right. Like that's the thing is, like, once you get the rep, that's only a bigger impetus to keep bringing value to the table.
Your material is the gasoline that fuels the car, and if we're not getting new material from you, then there's nothing we can do. The car's out of gas.
Right, and I love that word, that term, bringing value, because it's a two-way street. It really is a relationship, and although I would say that your relationship is really unique. I mean, it's far more unique than I had even imagined. I just kind of thought that John was just your manager. I didn't realize that you guys worked so tightly together, which is also your MO, John. But
it is, but it springs from Ian, which is really interesting. It's kind of, you're talking to kind of like the patient zero, kind of situation. It's like Ian learned from me and I learned from Ian, and the lessons that I learned working with Ian are what I apply to every other person I work with. And a lot of managers at my company apply to the people they work with. So it kind of spread like a virus. Weird metaphor this time. Sorry.
Ian, do you have any final words before we let you go? We're going to keep John here. He's like, oh, damn it. You're stuck for just a few more minutes.
I don't have any kids, so
okay.
Not yet. So.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for having me. And I guess in terms of any final words, I would say, if you're curious, go, about what, 7 years worth of work on a script looks like, go check out Infinite on Paramount Plus. And anything in there that you think is cool, I wrote that. And anything you think is not, then somebody else wrote that.
That's exactly. Exactly. All the good stuff was Ian.
All the good stuff was
bad
me.
Stuff was those other people.
Yeah, right.
You didn't get credit.
But that's pretty much it, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ian.
so much. And again, everybody, you can see Ian's previous interview on our YouTube channel. Thank you, Ian.
All right, take care.
Yeah.
Wow, so that really, this is a crazy relationship that you guys have. I mean, it's unique, and do you truly sort of have this kind of relationship with all of your clients? Because that would be exhausting.
In terms of what? In terms of the level of involvement?
Yes.
I try to. There are some clients and they've earned it, where they they're kind of going to do their own thing. But yeah, for the most part, I'm very involved in. I'll put it like this: I prefer my clients to break ideas with me and then have them go write it, because otherwise it just ends up, you get the script and you're like, what's this and how happened and what? So that's what I see as my value add. So yeah, I mean, honestly, look, my personal relationship with Ian is deeper than most of the clients, just for the obvious sake that I've known Ian for longer than my wife. I've known him since 2008 and I've been working with him that long. But the process is generally the same. Yeah, there are some clients where that is the exception. And to be honest with you, as I've gotten more clients and as I've gotten more success, and my wife and I are planning to start having a family in the next year or two. Once I have kids, I'm not going to be able to. My bandwidth will be even more limited down, let alone the fact that I run a company and I produce, and I have a family and I have a wife, and want to spend time with her. But yeah, I do spend a lot. I do that with my clients. So it does make me very picky about who I engage with and who I sign, because I'm not like an agent where it's like, all right, well, go write a script and I'll see if I can sell it. And that's what my level of involvement is. A very hands-on process.
And so has there been a script that you've worked on that eventually you just all realize that it's not working and you scrap it, or?
Yeah, that does happen.
Yeah.
And it's not a super fun thing, but it has happened. It's usually something where we were trying to hit a really narrow bullseye, and Yeah, and sometimes the writer, it's just not the genre or style that they are used to or comfortable with, and I'm trying to push them past their comfort zone, or that, you know, and it doesn't quite work. Sometimes we look at it and we're like, God, there's just not a movie. I mean, usually you hope that you figure that out at the log line or the outline stage,
Right.
and most of the time you do. But there have been a few times where we've gotten multiple drafts in the script, and we're just like, not cracking this, you know?
Right. Well, you know, we make a big deal, or at least I do, on the Inside Pitch about log lines, because for me, they really are, especially for new writers, it's sort of the life and death, because I'm not going to read anybody's script unless a person comes to me with a recommendation, right? But if I don't know this person has zero track record in town, and they want me to read their script, I can't read their script because I've got, you know, 100 other scripts that I have to read. And but the thing that can perhaps change my mind is a log line, because I can hear the log line. And you and I, we were involved in that Scripts and Scribes log line contest, because I was reading your feedback as well, which I thought was right on. And you know, like, I can tell just from a log line. If I can't tell if the script is going to be great or not per se, but I can certainly tell if it's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that I can tell. If it's a log line, if it's a concept, it's a different story, but a concept is not a log line. And so, you know, so if I hear that log line, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work. So it was interesting to hear you say that the log line is the most important part of the query letter. I tend to agree, because for me, that's where my eye goes first. And
I mean,
then
I don't even bother the rest of it.
Well,
I mean,
that's exactly right.
Look at the rest of it, but if the log line's not interesting, it generally doesn't matter.
But now, what about sort of like a quirky, fun query letter where maybe the log line is iffy, but the query letter shows that the guy or girl, excuse me, that they can write or at least entertain you somehow? No, you still don't care about that.
The only thing that would be interesting would be, I'm a former pop star, and like I used to do, or a really interesting background that applies to the kind of thing they want to write. Then I'm interested. Or like, I've already had some success, or I've been staffed on a TV show or something like that. Then I'm like, oh, okay, like maybe this person I'm just not seeing it, you know? But generally, no. Because the problem is, like, if the log lines, look, what we're doing is we're getting scripts out to agents and to executives, and we're saying, hey, let's see if we can make some money from this. If the log line's not good, it doesn't matter how quirky the writing is.
You know, it's like we, you know, shared the same placenta, because I feel the same exact way.
If
No
you're
matter
long enough, that's just, I feel like you have to evolve to that point, or else you're just, you know. But look, that doesn't mean it has to be like super down the middle commercial. Like if I read the log line for Juno, I'd be like, well, that's, like, it's different. Like Headhunter is not like, you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, the producer of Infinite would love the log line for Headhunter, but I did, because it was different and interesting and fresh. So like, that's more interesting to me than like guy with a gun chases after people who kidnapped his daughter, you know, like,
right.
I've seen that a million times, you know, and so is everybody else in town.
Yeah, like often I will read a log line, I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but it sounds so intriguing. I want to see if the writer can make this work.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Yeah.
That is 100% exactly it. Is the subject matter interesting to me? And that doesn't necessarily translate to commercial per se. But someone asked me recently, they were like, would you rather a commercial script or a more interesting script? And I was like, well, hopefully both. But, you know, I'd rather go with something that's interesting and different than something that felt paint by numbers, quote unquote, commercial, you know?
So talk about the process of you deciding to work with a writer. So let's say that you've read their samples and you like the log lines, but there's got to be more than that. Yes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, look, like, it's easy. Like, I'm actually meeting a bunch of people in the next 2 weeks who I read their script either through like it was a query letter, or it was from like USC, or like a client passed it along, you know? And And to be honest with you, the majority of times, I don't think I can sell the script, but I am interested in the writer and their writing. You know, I think they're a talented writer. So what I want to do is I want to hear about what they're working on next, if I think that's more commercial, and or see if we can come up with an idea together that is more commercial, that takes advantage of their talent, you know? So that is going to be the conversation I'm going to have with a few of them. You know, it's rare that I read a script and I'm like, this is just good to go. Or maybe with a little bit of work, it's good to go. More often than not, what I do is I read someone's script. I think they're a talented writer, but I don't think this is the idea. And unfortunately, a lot of time, up-and-coming writers are not great at figuring out either commercial and or intriguing ideas, you know? And so it's, for me, I'm like, hey, look, this script was cool. It was interesting enough for me to get on board. I don't know that it's going to be interesting enough to get the executives on board. Let's work on something that is either super out there and interesting and kind of like what I would call a bit of a blacklist stunt script, you know?
Right.
So that would be something that is going to, you know, a biopic or like a really insane idea for something, but it will launch you in a particular genre. Like I'm working with a client right now on, we're doing a kind of a teenage YA rom-com, but set in the world of a super famous pre-existing IP that we obviously don't own. It's a super famous, like, it's like if I said the two names, you would know it immediately. But we're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do a YA kind of story set in that world? Not because we can sell it, because I know everyone in town will want to read it, and then hopefully we'll get my client work in. She wants to write the next To All the Boys I Loved Before. She wants to be up for assignment work like that. So one thing we kind of mentioned in passing is, so I said that I'm married. My wife wrote Blonde Ambition. You know, we didn't necessarily think we could sell Blonde Ambition, which was the story of Madonna in the early 1980s. But we did think that it was the kind of script that everyone in town would want to read because it was unique and different. And it kind of told you something about a famous person that you didn't already know. We thought it would get her lots and lots of meetings. It would get her an agent, and it would get her, and, you know, it did lead to her getting an agent at WME. And it led to, you know, a lot of meetings. We did end up selling it, which was surpassed my expectations, which was great. But I literally told my in-laws, I'm like, we're never selling this script. Just don't ask me about it. But it also led to her getting a lot of work. And, you know, it led to her, we sold this K-pop pitch. She's writing something right now that's based on the true story of a musical icon, you know, but it also led to her writing female-driven stories. She wrote this script, Queens of the Stone Age, for Sony. She's writing this script called Murder on the Dance Floor, which is kind of a murder mystery, but told through dance with a super famous choreographer. So it really launched Elise in the world of music biopic, kind of female-driven biopics, but also female-driven stuff, you know, thrillers, whatever. And she kind of further enhanced that by writing Queens of the Stone Age and other stuff. So it's really put her, if you're doing a music biopic, particularly one that's female-driven, Elise has got to be like probably in the top 5 names on your list, you know, because that's what she does, and that's great. And that's not the only thing she wants to write, but it really launched her. So if we're working on like a blacklisty kind of thing, it's going to launch the writer in that realm, even if we can't sell it for that kind of thing, or it's going to be saleable. Those are the two kind of scripts I want to work on, are either things that are really buzzy samples that will get a lot of attention, and launch them into a genre. So like I was talking to a friend of mine, he's like, oh, my client wants to write the Blondie biopic. And I was like, oh, cool, do they want to write music biopics? Oh, no, they'd never want to write that. And then I was like, well, then why should they write the Blondie biopic? Like, that's going to launch them to write. If you read the Blondie biopic and it's good, you meet them and you're like, okay, great, what other kind of biopic music things do you want to write? And they're like, oh, no.
It's going to brand them.
Then it doesn't
it's going to brand them, yeah. And so.
Right. So you have to kind of think that way. You have to think about, like, I'm going to end up on some lists. Are those the kind of lists that I personally want to be on?
Great point. And, you know, I love the idea of the buzzy spec, because the truth is that the majority of new writers are not going to sell their script. They're really writing samples, and yet they're picking subject matters that are so just like middle of the road, or we've seen it a million times before. It's another.
I think the fact that you've seen it a million times before is a good thing. That's the sign, unfortunately, of a writer's not thinking properly. So like, well, it's just the same as all those other movies. And I'm like, yeah, that's a bad thing.
The key is to find that familiar element and then spin it somehow, right? You just find that twist. It's unique but familiar.
That's exactly it. So, like, I'll tell you what the last two things Ian and I, not the last two things, but two things Ian and I sold. We sold this thing to Fox called Capsule, which I think he mentioned in passing, which is basically about this guy. He's in his like early 30s. Life hasn't quite panned out for him the way that he was hoping was. He works in Silicon Valley. Everybody but him is getting rich. He starts getting these capsules from his future self, and they're holographic messages, and they tell him like, hey, do this, do that. Your life's going to become way better if you do this, right? So he does it. He gets a promotion. You know, he starts like, you know, he's just like super cool. He knows exactly all the right things to do. He's getting rich. And then one of the messages come in and says, you need to kill your best friend or else he'll try to kill you. He's like, I can't fucking do that. His best friend comes to the door, raises a gun, and says, I have to kill you or else you'll try to kill me. His best friend is getting messages from the future, from his future self too. That's crazy. Why is future him trying to kill him? So it's a really interesting, I'm like summarizing, not exactly, but basically the setup. And so we sold that to Fox, and that felt like very much in the vein of like Limitless or Source Code or those smart kind of buzzy things, but like a little twist. Or this other thing we sold called 1031, which was basically about this girl. She is taking her niece and nephew door-to-door trick-or-treating. They go around the block that they live on. The nephew has an asthma attack. They have to go home. She's going through the nephew's candy looking for a piece to kind of eat for herself, opens it up. There's inside the piece of candy is a note that says, help me, kidnapped, going to kill me, written like in a child's handwriting. She has to figure out which house in the block that note came from. So it's Rear Window meets Disturbia. You know, with a little bit of Halloween, you know,
right? Yeah,
and
those are both hooky, and they have exactly what it is that I'm always looking for, which is conflict, right? Because I'm always trying to look for, okay, what's the conflict that's going to hook me into this? And both of those have that element.
And you can see the trailer immediately. You can see the poster immediately.
Right off.
You know exactly what it is. For 1031, which we sold to Orion back before when it was a horror company, I commissioned someone to do a little drawing of a piece of Halloween candy with a note that came out of it saying, help me, kidnapped, you know? So people could kind of visualize almost like what the poster would be.
Right. Yeah.
It's a great script, 1031.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, so it's I really wish that new writers would just think more about trying to sort of capture the attention.
The same kind of way is true for pilots, I should say. In fact, if anything, it's more true because the chances of a writer who's never staffed on a TV show before writing a pilot that gets sold is way smaller than a feature spec. So if you write a buzzy, like that's how my clients have gotten staffed on Mr. Robot and like you know, this Netflix show Tiny Pretty Things, because they wrote these really buzzy pilots, you know, that spoke to their personal who they were, but they had a buzzy, fun idea to it, you know, and we weren't necessarily thinking of selling them. If they sold, that was awesome. But we were thinking, we want something, you don't want to write another like cop, doctor, lawyer show. People read a million of those. I used to work as a writer's assistant. I read a million of them when I was working on a cop show. What you want is something like, what they want is something different, because what they're looking for is a really interesting, fresh voice that they can come and put into the more traditional down the middle show. You know, they know people, like, you can figure out how to write a cop show, right? Like, it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of them out there. What they want is like, why are you the person? What is your unique perspective that you can bring to the cop show? And so you want to write a buzzy pilot that speaks to your background that is not a cop show, you know?
Yeah. Back when aspiring TV writers wrote specs rather than pilots, I had a friend who wrote a spec for Gilligan's Island. You know, this was like 50 years after the show went off the air. And the episode was that there was no more food on the island and they had to turn to cannibalism. And, you know, and it was like,
yeah, it's great.
And that was it. And that guy's career was launched from that.
Or there's the one that was like Friends meets the cast of Frasier meets the cast of Mad About You.
Yep, and then there was the one with Friends, but it was done with the Super Friends. So it was, you know, Spider-Man, Superman, Wonder Woman, you know, all living together in an apartment.
Like you're kind of hedging into original at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, but it's like those writers that tend to think that way. Look, I mean, we're still remembering those
Yeah, we're
scripts
sitting here remembering this stuff years
later, you know, decades later. And meanwhile, there's a writer who's, you know, sweating, trying to write the story about, you know, her grandmother's earthworm farm that like nobody's going to remember.
This is nobody should ever write this again. Okay, it's not this one. It's like this version, and it's always about someone from who like went to Los Angeles or New York, or they burned down, they went back home for various reasons. They got fired, the death in the family, something. They return home to their quirky small town, and their family runs an earthworm farm or a weird restaurant or a museum or like fucking whatever. And then they rediscover the joy of small town living and blah, 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 blah.
That is like
That's 99% of every script that you read, especially
like,
from new writers, especially from new writers.
And contest scripts. Oh my God.
Or the like writers on the verge or something like that was on Twitter being like, this is the thing I get the most. And I was like, thank you. Like, I'm glad to see someone else sees it as well. It is, you know what it is? Because, and I hate to say it, it's people thinking there's this phrase, write what you know. But that is wrong. Nobody, I don't want to read a screenplay. I don't want to write a script about a literary manager. Who gives a fuck? You know, what is interesting is write your perspective on something, write an interesting story from your point of view. You know, that's what we want, is not to write exactly what you need, is like write an interesting story from your point of view.
Great advice.
Yeah, going back to small towns thing is like a lot of the contest scripts I read.
Dude, road trip movies.
Yeah, yes.
I fucking hate road trip movies.
Yeah, especially
there's never any conflict in road trip movies. It's just a bunch of weird shit that happens, and it's because someone's like, I'm not going to outline them. They're just going to go on a journey. They're going to meet a crazy gun net. Okay, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool.
Right, and they're usually traveling somewhere to spread the cremains of a loved one.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
Always.
Yes. And it's the mother's last request that they go to this, you know, goldfish.
Right. Well, you know, M. Night wrote a script called Labor of Love.
I remember.
Which is a road trip movie, but it's a little different. But he's walking across the country, right? So that's, you know, that's.
I mean, look, there are Little Miss Sunshine's a road trip movie, and it's good. You know, there are good versions.
Absolutely.
The problem is, you have to be so good at it. You have to do something so amazing, like Kodachrome or whatever. Like, you have to be so good at it to like really break it. And to be honest with you, they haven't been super successful at the box office lately, you know? So like, I'm sure someone's going to write one and we're going to be like, wow, this is amazing. Like Garden State's a version of that, right? Like of the going home. Like there are those scripts that are good, Rachel getting married or whatever, but I think they have to be really specific and they have to be really good. And it's like, and they're what we call quote unquote execution dependent, you know, because the log line ain't doing you any favors.
That's right. And that can often be the kiss of death. This is why I always say for new writers, concept is king, because if I hear a log line and I say, that script is execution dependent, then I'm probably not going to read the script unless it really intrigues me, which it probably won't. And because I don't have time to take a chance on that. That's me personally. So, again, it's got to really, really, really grab me. But, it's like a script like Nebraska. I remember when that was pitched to me. And, it had that sort of additional hook of the idea of
the lottery ticket, yeah.
The lottery ticket. It still didn't send me out into the stratosphere. I was like, and the movie did okay, and it got good reviews, and it got some Oscar nominations, I believe.
But it takes Alexander Payne to get that made.
But it's Alexander Payne, that's right. So it's like Alexander Payne, you've got Dan Futterman. You have these certain kind of writers that are very, very good at this stuff. And then there's everybody else. So it's just about really thinking, about what you're doing.
Like, hey, here's this thing, and you're both like, oh yeah, I've read a million of this. I think that speaks to, don't write, if people be like, well, I'm going to still write my thing, that's fine. But isn't it better to like do something that's not crowded, to do something you're like, oh, this is like different, you haven't quite, or you're like, you figure out that twist on it that's like different, you know, like that's really the thing, you know. I saw someone in the comments be like, Zombieland. I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's an example of immediately you flipped the road trip movie on its head by being like, it takes place in a world with zombies. I'm like, oh yeah. Immediately I'm like, oh, that's interesting, you know. So yeah, if you have to find, you can't do the generic one that's like the reason it's interesting is because it happened to you, or like this is like, or it's based on your personal experiences. There has to be like, I think the lottery ticket's really the thing that makes Nebraska interesting, is because what happens when your father thinks he's rich? You mean, you know, he's not rich, but he's telling everyone he's rich, and how does that affect family dynamics? Or Zombieland's like, what's a road trip movie in a post-zombie apocalypse look like, you know?
Right. Conflict again, listening for conflict. Go ahead, Ramesh.
Tony wants to know, do you tend to be drawn to action scripts, or do you manage writers of all genres? And also, when you pick up a script that someone you trust sends your way, what draws you most to it? Voice, story?
Let's do one question at a time, or else I'm going to forget what the questions are.
Okay.
So the first question is, do I like, I mean, like, I like all scripts. I mean, like, I've been talking about my wife who wrote, like, a Madonna biopic. I've been talking about my client who wrote a cannibalism dark comedy, you know? For me, I like all scripts. I mean, look, I probably wouldn't do a super broad comedy. I'm not like the Farrelly Brothers kind of person. I think I also find it really hard to represent like pure comedy writers, not like dramedy, not like dark comedy. I mean, like purely just wacky comedy, because it's really hard to give notes on I might be like, this isn't funny, and then you're like, yeah, this is funny. It's funny to me. Like, funny humor is very subjective in a way that weirdly, like, I can be like, hey, this sequence is not scary, and they're like, yeah, it's not scary. Like, that is weirdly, for whatever reason, less subjective. But other than that, I represent people who write all sorts of different things. In fact, if anything, sometimes you don't want writers who write exactly like say you wrote exactly the same kind of thing Ian writes for whatever reason. I'd be like, well, shit, I already have Ian Shore, you know? That's not to say I wouldn't rep someone who writes in a slightly similar vein. And to be honest with you, that comes up a lot for agents, right? They're like, well, I already have someone in this vein, you know, and they aren't getting enough success. Like, you know, we're like, I mean, so it does vary, but the truth is I represent and I read everything. Sorry, what was the second question?
The other one was also, when you pick up a script that someone recommends to you, what draws you most? Is it voice, story, or the level of the craft that when both mesh?
I mean, they're all kind of the same. I mean, like, the level of the craft is indicative in the story and the voice, you know? I mean, literally, it's just, the really simple answer is, it's kind of like, people want me to like give a quantify like my, like, what is it exactly this formula? It's like, when you listen to a song on the radio, why do you like it? I don't know. It connects to your ear. You like the chorus. You think it's fun. You like, it gets stuck in your head. I read things, and if I keep reading, then it's good. If I stop reading, it's bad. It's very simple. I can't quantify it more exactly than that. It's like, if I like reading it, I keep reading it. Generally, I think dialogue is kind of like probably the first thing I look for. But like, if it's a script that speaks to me and then I think there's something interesting in it, then I'm going to keep reading. And there just isn't an exact formulation on it. There is an exact formulation of like, I always think of like this, people kind of want a formulation for me. It's kind of like, you're like on I don't know, Tinder or whatever, and they're like, I'm looking for a 6-foot man with brown hair who has a sense of humor and likes football. And then this person goes on a date with someone, and they're like, yeah, not for me. I don't think we're a match. And the person's like, well, I don't understand. I'm 6 foot. I have brown hair. I like football, and I have a good sense of humor. And they're like, yeah, I don't know, not there. And you can't like formulate it exactly, because it just doesn't work that way. Right. It's not. You can't write to a spec. You can't write to specifications, right? And it doesn't. And so I know people want an exact answer of what you're looking for, but if I could give people an exact answer of what I'm looking for, I wouldn't need any more clients, would I? I could just be like that. It's like, what makes a movie that sells? What makes a good movie? Well, probably these elements. Well, then why don't you just make that every time?
Should writers have a brand?
I think people should choose a genre they want to stick in, and and I don't exactly mean like only write horror movies, but what I mean is if you get so I'll give you an example. So I read this woman's script, and it was really good, and it was kind of a dark thriller with kind of sci-fi elements, but they didn't really pop up until the end. And so I did a Zoom with her, and I was like, oh, what else do you want to write? Like, what's kind of like a show you would want to write? And she's like, oh, I really want to like Schitt's Creek. I was like, what? And she's like, I just really like Schitt's Creek. And maybe I want to, and like, I'm a little thrown because I read this thing and it was really dark and fucked up and interesting. She's like, yeah, I don't want to write anything like that anymore. I was like, okay. So I'm reading some more of her work, but like, it was really like, what? Because like, if I took out her script and gave it to a bunch of people, they'd be like, this is great. We need more female horror genre writers. And then they'd meet her and she's like, yeah, I don't want to write any more of that. And they'd be like, well, why the fuck am I talking to you?
Right.
That's what I want to hire you for. And so that, I think, so like, if you write a great horror script, you can still write a great dark thriller script or a supernatural thriller or a thriller or even maybe an action thriller. Like they're all kind of on a paradigm of something, Like if David Fincher announced he's doing a Three Stooges movie, you'd be like, is it like dark and fucked up or something? Like you'd be like, that's weird, Or if Farrelly Brothers said he was doing a serial killer movie, you'd be like, that seems kind of odd, And like, it's not to say people always stick in those genres. What I'm saying is if you apply to David Fincher certain rules and expectations, and those probably apply to you as well. And it's better to be on a list and be really good at one thing and get hired and paid a lot of money for it than to be on no lists, So I need you to think about that.
Absolutely.
One question. When you read
that doesn't mean, by the way, down the road that you can't like switch out and do different things.
Right. Like, look at Frank Darabont. He started his career in horror, and he was branded that way, and then he broke out.
But you establish a beach as a representative. I established a beachhead for you in a certain part of the thing. Like, there are certain execs in town who do horror. They're not the same executives who do comedy. They don't. And like James Wan Company, they're not doing comedy. They're not even doing drama. They're doing horror and thriller for the most part. Maybe a bit of action, but that's really what they're doing. Right. And if you wanted to do comedy, there's different companies that do comedy. There are some companies that do like a bunch of stuff, but generally, and there are certain executives, and so we had spent a lot of time building up your knowledge base and a certain kind of, thing. And if you want to move out of that, eventually that's totally fine. You can write a spec that kind of establishes that, but it is smart to kind of think about, okay, and then you want to start making a living, and like that's the real goal is to get you paid and make you a full-time writer,
John, somebody wanted to go back and just ask you if you could just talk a little bit more about how you optioned the reincarnation papers. Somebody here wrote, the novelist actually paid a reward to Rafi Crone to get the reincarnation papers in front of execs, and it happened. Anything about?
I was talking to Rafi, and like, did you get that money? And like, I don't know, maybe they did, and I just didn't know about it. I'll have to ask Rafi. Look, I have a long thread on Twitter about it. If you want to read all the details, just go and like search John Zalzerny and Eric Micrans or whatever. Eric had put that in there, but that was only if the movie got made. So I don't know if he ever paid Rafi his bonus or whatever it was. That was not right. Rafi didn't do it because of that necessarily. He just did it because he thought it was a really good idea for a movie. If I stumped around town every idea that people were like, I'll give you $50,000 if it gets made, I'm like, yeah, but like it's not going to get made. So why would I waste my time on that? Which is a good idea. But and that didn't play into it at all for me. I just thought it was a really good idea for a concept for a movie, so that's why I optioned it. But if you want to get the nitty gritty in it, there's like a 26-part thread that I did on it on Twitter.
Someone named Ian Shaw piped in and said Rafi got the money.
Did he?
Yes. Ian just posted saying Rafi got the money.
He did? All right, I'll have to ask Rafi. I talked to Rafi like a month ago. I didn't hear that, but maybe he did. If Eric said it happened, then it happened.
Ideally, when you meet a writer you click with and you like their script, ideally someone wants to know how many screenplays would you expect them to have had before you take them on as a client?
I'm down with one. Yeah, I'm down with one, but I think other managers prefer like two. So I'm a one script. If you've read one script, you write one. My personal belief is if you can write one really good script, you can write another one. But other managers and sometimes agents, what'll happen? Managers sometimes they want two, but sometimes what'll happen with my experience with agents is they'll be like, "Hey, can I read a second one just to like confirm?" And that's when they're like on the fence about it. But yeah, so that happens sometimes. But I would say like 90% of the time, they only want to read one script. You know, I remember when my wife wrote Blonde Ambition, they're like, well, sometimes people were like, well, what else has she written or whatever? And I was like, that's her first screenplay she ever wrote. That's what you got. You're stuck with that, you know, which it did okay for her, you know?
Yeah. I used to have a coworker. He's now a manager, Brian Scher. And that was what he always said. He was like, you know something? I just need one script. That's all I need is one script. If it's the right script, it's just one. Yeah. Mr. Ramesh, do we have one last question for John because he can't spend his whole day with us?
Yeah. Someone just wants to know regarding, did you have a plan B if studios balked at the high cost of action scenes?
Nope.
Nope.
Working without a tightrope. That's the way to do it. Without a net.
Right? When you do a script like that, you know you've got like, that was what the risk of it. We know there was like 6 shots for it. It wasn't like a movie like our previous spec Capsule. That was like a $30 million movie. There were a lot of different options for it. Or 1031, the horror movie. There were a lot of options for places like that. But Infinite was a big swing for the fences because you had 6 buyers. You know, Disney, Paramount, Universal, Fox, Sony. I mean, there's Legendary. Well, Legendary, I don't know if they were around at the time. Lionsgate, blah 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 blah. But there weren't a lot, and if it hadn't been them, then that would kind of be it. I mean, look, if you look at Ian and I, our first scripts were really expensive, and then we started to tone it down with Capsule. Infinite. Look, will I ever develop a script as big as Infinite ever again? I don't know, because like it's really hard to get those things in. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea, though. You know. But more of the things that Ian and I develop now are probably sub $50 million, you know?
So do you talk to your clients, if your client comes to you with a project that's a $150 million idea, do you talk them out of it? Do you try to work?
I don't talk them out of it. It's a good idea, it's a good idea, it's a good idea, you know? Yeah. It's a good idea. If it's an idea that, I'll put it like this. If your movie's gonna cost under $20 million or under $10 million or whatever, then it's almost like it has to be like X good, which is still like really good, but it has to be X good. If it's going to cost $150 million, that idea and that execution better be freaking impeccable, you know, because it's a really narrow target, you know, really narrow. So the more expensive your script will be to produce, the higher level of quality it needs to be, not just in the execution, but really on the conceptual basis. Does this feel interesting and different enough to make it through all the various, you know, gatekeepers? People always say, you only need one person to say yes. That is completely incorrect. You need a zillion people to say yes. You need the CE, so let's say Infinite, right? You needed like me to say yes. You needed like the other producers to say yes. You then needed the agents to say yes. Then you needed you need Mark Varadian to say yes, Lorenzo to say yes, and then Liz Raposa at the studio to say yes, her boss to say yes. Then we sold it. Then we needed to find a director to say yes, which obviously ended up being Antoine. Then you needed a movie star, and then a movie star dropped out, so you needed another movie star. You know, like, so the marketing people had to say yes. So many people, the distribution people had to say yes. So many people have to say yes at every single step of the thing. And so it's not one person, you know?
There are so many finance projects out there that never get made.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm always astounded by that, that projects just fall away, that, you know, they're sort of full system go, and then they, you know, the engine's
you mean you're talking about like something where like one piece of financing dropped out or something?
Perhaps, and then they have to scramble to find that, but as a result, everything's pushed off.
I remember at one point with Infinite, it was like kind of falling apart because something or other had happened. It's like you don't want it to sit fallow for too long, because then people start second guessing themselves,
right?
And they move on to new projects or something else happens. Like, think about Infinite. If Mark Wahlberg had not come on board, I don't know if we would have been able to get another star like 3 months out, and then the leadership at the studio changed like within the next 6 to 9 months. You know, and then we would have been from the previous administration, so we would have been like, oh, that's those other people's project. You know, watch the player. You know, like that's what happens. You know, like they wash all the other projects out. They're like, bring on our stuff. I want the stuff I'll get the credit for.
It really is difficult to get a movie made for so many reasons. And then if you do get it made, then there's still the hurdles of distribution and finding an audience. And it's always a miracle. That's why in our group, I'm always like, look, okay, you saw a bad movie, but like, you don't necessarily have to slam it and destroy it because we're all filmmakers. And we should be able to relate to how difficult it was to get that made. Plus, by the way, there's so many fingers in the pie along the way that it's easy for a movie to go bad.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the bigger the budget, the better chance it is for something to go wrong. I was talking to some clients I had lunch with on Friday, and I was like, the lower the budget, which isn't to say like all lower budget movies are good, but I was talking to my colleague Zach Zucker, who made this movie The Novice, which just won Tribeca, and they made that movie for $2 million. And they're just at $2 million, there was like 3 producers, and there was the director, and honestly, for a $2 million movie, that's like not a lot of, like, usually sometimes there's like a bunch of like different financing entities or something. But like the more people involved, the more time something can go wrong. But even with like not a lot of people involved, I gotta tell you, it all lives or dies by the director. And as a producer, if people think you have a ton of power, at the end of the day, you really don't, because the director is the director, unless you fire the director, which is in itself a complete like shit show, which demonstrates a lot. You can lose the cast, you can lose, I know it happened on my client Chris Thomas Devlin's movie. It's public knowledge, so I'll mention it. He wrote the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre for Legendary. And the directors were let go, I think, a week into filming, and they brought on a new director, and a lot of times what happened on Jane Got a Gun, right. And that's generally that is break glass in case of emergency bad. It really lives or die on the director. And sometimes even great directors make movies that are not ideal,
Often they do, often.
Yeah, I mean, like Steven Soderbergh's my favorite living director. And Billy Wilder is my favorite, not living director, and they both have movies that I'm not a huge fan of necessarily. But you know what? I respect what they were going for and that they tried, and like I think that's what the thing is. But you're completely right. If you work in this industry, sometimes I'll read reviews and they'll be like, the terrible script by blankety blank, and I'm like, that person, like, you really think they approved everything? Like, it just doesn't work that way,
right?
There's so many factors that go in, and nobody wants to make a bad movie. No one ever. They're trying to make something good, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. And sometimes people can be delusional about something that's bad, but they think it's good. But often still those things don't get made because you do need so many yeses along the way. I just read a script very recently that came from a production company, and I said to my coworker, I was like, honestly, the only thing that I can say about this script is that there's nobody at this production company who knows what they're doing. Just plain and simple, nobody. And the movie's supposedly financed, and I was like, there's no way that they're going to get this movie made. There's just no way.
Did you read? I don't want to get too much into detail on it. Did you read In the End by Brian T. Arnold? Did that come across your desk?
I don't think so.
Okay, because that was like all over. The clients are up to APA. It's my client at APA, but WME got really excited about it, and there's like a lot of. I won't get into the detail, but there's a lot of really interesting things happening with that script. And yeah, that's a really interesting script where I think it is not your normal script, but there's some really interesting things happening to it that I think speak to. Some people didn't see it, but when I read it, I thought it was the most amazing script, and we luckily found a lot of people who felt similarly. And I think I'm excited for all the good things that are happening for that script to kind of be public knowledge eventually, because I think it really speaks to a good script gets recognized.
Right. Right. And I totally believe that. It doesn't mean that the writer's career will be launched or that the movie will be made, but good scripts do rise to the top. And I say all the time that you know, just this week I had to put a list of scripts together for one of the agency's clients. And, you know, I go back into my reservoir, you know, scripts that I've read 25 years ago. And so it's like, you know, great scripts never die. They don't.
Flight, right? Flight, that was something that, like, didn't Denzel's, like, agent on his deathbed basically say, do Flight?
Yes, it's true. In fact, the movie was dedicated to Ed, as a matter of fact. But it was The Little Things was a script that I found from, like, you know, 30 years ago, because Denzel wanted to.
Scripts that they never die.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's like, you know, so if Denzel says, gee, I want to do, you know, kind of like a 1990s type thriller, then I just go back to the scripts that I read in the 90s. That's all.
That's why the Blacklist has actually been really great about getting stuff on there, is because I have people coming to me about scripts that were on there like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And I can't get into details on it, but like Capsule, which we sold back in 2013 before I was even a manager, which Ian wrote, there's some really, you know, that was a thing. We sold it to Fox, and the tricky thing was it was designed to be a $30 million movie, but Fox doesn't really make $30 million movies. At the time, they made $80 million movies, you know? So you're trying to they're trying to do the script that should have been one thing and put it into another thing, and that was a little tricky. And then the Fox Disney buyout happened, and that stalled everything, and that stalled for a long time. But now, you know, there is a space for, movies like that, you know, in the new kind of, I can't get into details on it, but in the new iteration of 20th century and Disney and stuff like that. So there's figuring out new ways to get that done. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that script could find a new way to come back to life in a really exciting way. So the good scripts don't die. They only die when there's $1 million against them. That's when you get into trouble.
And that's true. There is actually a great script that I'm trying to get for one of my clients, and it's got a lot of money against it, and also a rather unpopular producer at this time. So, but yeah, so it's somebody wrote that Hollywood is like politics. It is. It's total.
People are always like, "What sounds like politics?" And I'm like, "Have you ever watched anything about, like? Have you ever seen like Sunset Boulevard or The Player? Like, what did you think we were all dealing with? Anything where you're dealing with millions of dollars, like, has like political elements to it. There's always office politics. There's always stuff like that. That's all things. Right. Any industry where there's like millions and millions of dollars at play is going to end up. I mean, I remember reading articles about like a peanut farm and how there's like crazy politics on this peanut farm, and I was like, whenever human beings are involved, there's political elements to things and power plays and things like that.
I'm doing a piece on solar farming right now, and you wouldn't believe the politics behind that.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and then of course with
the
movie business, there's celebrity and ego, which I think sort of exacerbates it. Steve Enlow wants to know, what does against mean? Basically, Steve, I'll tell you later, but basically it just means that a project is in debt. And
they paid the writer or a lot of money, or they spent a lot of money on it. Like I have a movie, they was in pre-production. They stopped it 3 weeks before it got made. So there's $1 million against it, because that's how much they spent on various locations and crew and things like that. And so and the movie is a lower budget movie, so that's like maybe like more than a tenth of its budget. It's just dead costs. And so we're gonna have to figure out one day how to like deal with that, because for another studio to pick that movie up means they have to pay back the studio the money that it's already. Let's say you sold a script for $1 million to Warner Brothers, but it's never going to get made at Warner Brothers ever. But Universal decides they want to take that. You take the script, they're like, we like the script, we like to make it. Universal has to pay Warner Brothers the $1 million they spent you, and on top of it, interest.
And the interest is insane.
Interest, and they tack on charges for like administration and overhead. So like it could end up being $1.5 million, you know? And so they're like, do they really want to pay back the money? Is that really what they want to do? You know, is it really worth $1.5 million? And sometimes it is. Netflix will do that. Army of the Dead, they bought out of Universal. So it does happen, but it has to happen when it feels like a sure thing. A director and actor like, this is my next movie. And it's very hard to get directors and actors excited about a project that is in such a state of limbo.
Right. And of course, agents are very careful.
Very.
Yeah, right. So it's like we have to be careful with, even if we're trying to somehow wrestle these projects from some place, we have to be careful about getting a client excited about it.
You don't want to, that's the nightmare for agents and representation in general, especially agents, is getting a client excited about the project and then not being able to deliver on it, because then they feel like, well, my agents lied to me, they failed. Maybe there's another agency I should be at where they wouldn't fail me.
Agents get fired over that all the time. All the time they get fired for that.
That's why they're so risk averse. I had a friend who makes independent horror movies, and he's like, why won't agents take me seriously? You know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, you make movies that cost less than $1 million. For an agent, they're like, wait, my director client's going to be working on that for 2.5 years, and they're going to get paid like, I don't know, 50 grand or something. And like, which means I'm gonna get $5 grand, and they're gonna be like, I'm not gonna be able to deal with them for 2 years or something. And then maybe the movie turns out bad, and then like everyone's forgotten about them, and then that's career over. So like that is just how it kind of works. You have to think when you're doing things. This is less a writer thing, more of a producer thing, from the point of view of the other people that you are dealing with. It's generally a good thing to do is in any kind of place is like, what is a manager looking for? What is an agent looking for? What is a producer looking for? And how do I make their life easier? There's a great piece that Empire Magazine did with Chris McQuarrie, which they've really like taken down because I think Empire Magazine deleted a lot of their back catalog. He talks about moving from being someone who looked at studio executives as the enemy who was preventing his vision from getting on screen to understanding that they were people who had their own set of problems and agendas that they need to get these certain kind of movies made. And he's like, I have a skill set and I can help get that made. That's how he moved from being the guy who did, what was his directorial debut?
Way of the Gun.
Way of the Gun, to being the guy who's directing Jack Reacher and Mission Impossible movies, where he's like, look, the kind of movies I might want to write, you know, are very rare to get made. Write and direct are very rare to get made. But what I can do is work on pre-existing IP, which is, and with a huge movie star, which is the kind of thing they do want to get made. You know, and look, this is him directly. Like, I have it saved somewhere. He's like, look, am I happier? No, but I'm much more successful. You know, and I think long term down the road, hopefully that does lead to Chris McQuarrie being like, hey, I want to go make this $10 million movie about something less commercial. And they're like, well, you're Chris McQuarrie, so I guess you must know what you're talking about because you made all the Mission Impossible movies. You know, I don't know if that'll happen, but that's maybe the calculation. But he's getting things made because he's like, I have a certain amount of skill set. I can work within the system as opposed to trying to make the system work for me, which doesn't often work.
And our members can see our interview with Christopher McQuarrie on our YouTube channel. So look for that. Victoria mentioned Chad St. John. I think you're probably talking about, I think it was called The Day Before, that screenplay. That was really good, but then it kind of got
destroyed by Editorial.
By the Tom Cruise movie, right? And so, you know, like, you're done. So there's
same studio. That is a particular kiss at death.
There's so many crazy factors, you know, but it's just that I guess Tom Cruise wanted to do that movie, and you know, so it's done. Well,
that whole script was crazy because the person who wrote the spec script, when it used to be called All You Need Is Kill, as it was based on the manga, he didn't get credit on the movie.
No,
right? I've never seen that before. I mean, it makes slight sense because it's an adaptation, not an original. But he didn't get credit on the movie, which is crazy.
Not even in like the closing credits?
No, I don't think because it was
astonishing. And
McQuarrie did it. McQuarrie rewrote it.
McQuarrie and someone else, I think.
Yeah, Doug Liman?
No, not Liman.
No, Liman directed it. That's right.
But what was really interesting was it was originally designed to be like a Jake Gyllenhaal movie for like, I don't know, $60 million or $50 million. They originally wanted to make it pretty small in scope, and the original spec, it literally opens and it's kind of like I don't know, it's like you're just in it immediately. The Groundhog Day used to open and you were in Groundhog Day and you had no backstory on how that happened. And it was kind of, if I remember the spec, which was amazing, it opened and he was literally in the person who wrote it had gone on to have a great career, and they still work all the time. That's the thing that people don't sometimes understand, is that everyone in the industry knows what the scope, the deal is. Do you know what I'm saying? If it doesn't help you to have a movie that comes out and doesn't do well, but everyone still knows, like, oh, you're a good writer because I read the script. That's a great thing about being a screenwriter. Even if the movie isn't good, you can still go back to the script and read it and be like, oh, well, this is the original script. This is the thing. Or you don't get credit like the original writer of All You Need Is Kill.
I remember Passion of the Ark was a comedy that sold for like $1 million, and then Universal rewrote it big time as Evan Almighty, the sequel to Bruce Almighty. And those original writers, literally, like in the closing credits, somewhere in the scroll in tiny little font, they were given credit for that.
Edge of Tomorrow was the Butterworths. The Butterworth, Jez and John Henry Butterworth got credit with McCory.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, yeah, they were not. The original writer is. Oh
yeah, I have that. All You Need Is Kill too.
It was. This is like the thing that like development nerds talk about all the time, or like the scripts that didn't. It was Dante Harper, D.W. Harper.
Dante Harper, yeah. Right. Well, look, we could geek out over this stuff all day long. But I think we need to let John go. He's been more than generous with his time. It'd be 2 hours.
I know there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to. I'm on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. You can ask me those questions on Twitter. If I have a good response, I'll give a good response. If I don't know, I just don't know. But yeah, feel free to ask me any of those questions that you didn't get asked on.
So please follow
on Twitter.
Please follow John on Twitter. Tell him that you met him here. And John, we so appreciate your time. It was really fun also to hear about you and Ian. And I think maybe in the near future, you and I should go do lunch or something, because I would just love to talk more.
Do lunch, man. I'm down.
Let's do it, man. All right, John, thank you so much. And for all of our members, thank you so much for staying with us. We so appreciate your participation in our group. For the dads, happy Father's Day. And we look forward to seeing you here. We're bringing Final Draft in. They're going to do a tutorial. I don't know if that will be exciting or not, but we're putting that in the works. So
happy
for those
Juneteenth,
of you,
everybody.
Say again?
Happy Juneteenth.
Oh, and happy, is that
is, yeah.
I thought it was yesterday, because we had
everybody took yesterday off because today is Juneteenth.
You're right. So happy Juneteenth, happy Father's Day. And again, thank you, John. Thank you. Mr. Ramesh, as always, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in our next live broadcast.
Yes.